Don't let rampant politics and clusterfuckery ruin all your projects and your sanity. Smooth ugly penny lines and make it all make sense. Get experience by osmosis here on Corporate Underpants.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Corporate Underpants, Season 1, Episode 2. The first episode we had back before the end of the year, and then we had a holiday hangout, and now I am here with the first of the year. Welcome into 2025. I'm Tamara Adlin. I am the host and creator of Corporate Underpants, which I'm finally launching after many years of wanting to do. And this is going to be a live show, so then I don't have to do a lot of editing on it, because that's something that kept me from doing it before. And it's going to be a series of things, including what we're doing today, which is exploring the world of corporate politics by exploring one case of corporate politics in the product world and how a senior professional dealt with that and overcame it, to give you some experience by osmosis. So corporate underpants is when org issues show up in your products, like visible panty lines ruining an entire outfit. The idea of corporate underpants is not new. I was having a great conversation this week with Larry Swanson, who's a friend of mine and in the content world. And he pointed me to Conway's law, which was in 1967. Conway's law says that any system, any product, or I'm going to get this slightly wrong, but anything that's launched by definition and as a rule will reflect the communication patterns of the team that created it. That's corporate underpants. If the communication patterns suck, then no matter how good the team is, no matter how good the designers are, no matter how good the process is, then the product that you end up distributing or launching is going to have problems with it as well. And I like to call that corporate underpants. The name is new. The idea is not. This idea and the audience that I'm trying to get to here, who I think you are, is someone who's trying to become more senior in the world of product. You could be a product manager, a program manager, you could be in my field of user experience, and you're trying to get more senior, and you're realizing that learning all the methods, learning all the tools, learning all the stuff in the double diamond is good, but it's not enough to get you great at your job, because somehow things always come in from the sides or from above or from below that ruin your project plans, no matter how solid and great they are. I call those tornadoes or earthquakes, and they tend to come from misaligned executives. So we are going to talk about how getting better and better at what we call politics, getting better and better at managing the internal people in our organizations, our own customers, our own users of the work that we do, will make us better and better at launching great products. And there is no one answer to this, because as Tolstoy said, all happy families are the same. All unhappy families are unhappy in unique ways. So there's no sort of one set of stories that's going to get you great at politics. But my idea is, what if we can give you access to a whole bunch of stories that'll get you better and more experienced at politics? I myself, as a consultant since 2005, have been on over 85 teams, and I'm inviting onto this show people who have been part of senior teams and experienced chaos and clusterfuckery. And the first one of those is today. I'm really excited that Jeff Verona is joining us. Before I bring him on, I want to say this is my launch into 2025. If you have something that you've been meaning to do, I think you should just do it and try it. If you're interested in following along with this, you can go to corporateunderpants.com and get on the mailing list, because the LinkedIn algorithm isn't always great for showing you things. It's recordings of this are also going to be live on the Corporate Underpants podcast that I think I launched. It is fucking hard to do basic stuff on the internet. Job security. Another highlight of this week is one of my favorite people to follow on LinkedIn, Pavel Samsonov's, oh my God, Pavel, who does great posts and doesn't seem to give a shit who sees them, which makes me really happy. Did another post on UX being dead. I love this. Everybody loved this, because the point of the post is that the conversation about UX being dead has been happening over and over again since Pavel's cartoon starts in 2016. It happened way before that. Believe me, someone who's long in the tooth like me remembers when it happened in the early 2000s. Here's my message to all of us. The one thing that we're really great at in user experience and product is people. AI is never going to solve the problem of people trying to work together, ever. Personas are never going to solve the problem of people trying to work together, ever. What's going to solve the problem of people trying to work together is people who are good at getting other people to work together. We're going to explore the problem of corporate underpants. And as some of you who know me know, I also have a solution to that I call align before design or alignment personas. I'm working on a book on that right now. And if you're interested in being an early reader and giving me feedback, I would love that. You can send me a note at corporateunderpants.com. Without further, oh, and by the way, my name's Tamara Adlin. I live in Seattle. I've been in the user experience world since before it was user experience world. I got my master's in human-centered design in 1996, have been working in startups since, worked at Amazon for 3 years, wrote a couple books on personas, and then have been consulting mostly in early stage startups ever since. So I have got some stories to share with you, and I hope that my lens and my perspective is useful to you. Let's bring on another lens. I'm going to bring on Jeff Verona. Hello, Jeff.
Hello, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Oh, God, I hope it's a happy one. This whole New Year thing has just become nerve-wracking. It used to be like exciting parties, and now I'm going to stay at home and be nervous.
That's called aging.
It's called a. Well, that's what that is. Oh my God. So Jeff, you came to the very first one of these, and we didn't know each other before. I think you knew who I was.
Not
just because
directly. I had seen you on NSA.
Yeah, NSA is Never Search Alone, which, by the way, is a huge free network for job seekers that I highly recommend to anyone who's out there looking. That's some volunteer work that I do. And Jeff, you've been looking for a while.
I am a senior product manager looking for opportunities in B2B software companies that typically will provide operational productivity types of tools and solutions. Ideal company profile would be a medium-sized business with 50 to 500 employees. It could be a later stage startup as well. But usually I like to serve small to medium businesses and would prefer an organization that's trying to break into a new market and or trying to launch a new product.
Okay, so for those of you listening who are looking for work, by the way, notice how specific Jeff was able to be about what he's looking for. And this is melding the two worlds of Never Search Alone and Corporate Underpants, but it's nerve-wracking, but very useful to figure out exactly who you are and exactly what you want to do next. Because if you don't do it, somebody else has to figure out what you want to do next. So I commend you on that specificity, although that must make you nervous in some ways to be that specific.
It does, and I still trip over it at times.
We all do. What was the last gig you were? Tell us a little bit about your career trajectory.
The last gig was with Publicis Sapient as a senior product manager consultant working on behalf of their clients to solve their complex digital transformation issues. I happened to work on a supplier portal for a large US retailer that was serving 17,000 suppliers and trying to consolidate 6 applications under a single roof.
Okay, so that's massive internal tools work.
Yeah, it was still externally facing because we wanted self-service management of the suppliers' merchandising team to set up their own team on the platform.
Okay.
It was supplier facing as well.
So the story that so you have been in product for a long time, and you have seen really great teams with really great processes somehow manage to launch products that are not as great as they really could have and should have been.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Probably. Tell me more about that.
So very early in my career, I was a business analyst technically, and the role I was in with a customer lending organization, or consumer lending organization, I should say. We were looking at the loan officer's experience with.
Okay, so hold on. I'm going to take this apart in pieces. So consumer lending involves an organization, a big parent organization, right? And then a bunch of loan officers, right, who are then interacting with the general public who want money to buy something.
Yes. Typically, you'll see this most often in automotive and mortgage, very often. And we're looking at the loan officer's experience with setting up the loan and looking for ways to improve their experience. And the way that the project came about was there was a desire to reduce the amount of time it took the loan officer to fill out the application on behalf of the consumer and make sure that process of going out to the credit decisioning engine and coming back was a round trip of less than 5 minutes.
Okay, so hold on a second. Again, we're gonna peel this apart. So the situation is, let's pretend it's a company that sells banana cars,
Mhm.
and Banana Cars Incorporated has dealerships, and in the dealerships there's loan officers, and there's people who come in and want to buy a banana car,
Mhm.
and so the people who come in sit down with the loan officer,
Mhm.
and the loan officer helps them fill out an application, which
Mhm.
is actually a digital application,
Yes.
and then clicks send, and that digital application goes back to Banana Corporate
Mhm.
or the whoever,
Mhm.
and it decides whether or not this person is worthy of a loan.
Yes.
That was 5 and there was some goal to make that whole loop under 5 minutes.
Yes. Absolutely.
Okay.
100%.
Do you know why? Why 5 minutes?
It was a desire just to reduce the time and friction for the loan officer
For
overall.
the loan officer.
Because in that business, capturing more loan opportunities meant more money for the organization. So if we were easier to do business with, a loan officer would most likely choose us first over other financial institutions.
Okay, so my brain just got twisted, so I'm really glad that I'm pulling this apart. There were multiple the loan officer could get that loan serviced by multiple financial institutions,
Yes,
and
absolutely. We're
Banana Cars
competing.
Incorporated would prefer it to be with Banana Cars?
Absolutely.
I see, but they could have gone out to Jennifer's Credit Union, or they could have
Yes,
gone to
absolutely.
Chase.
Yep.
I see. So if the loan officer is sitting there, and the easiest thing to do, because the customer is sitting in front of them, is to say, "Let me get this approved." Banana Cars wants the loan officer to know Banana Cars is gonna make this seamless. I'm gonna try them first.
Mhm.
I see.
Absolutely.
Okay, keep
Absolutely.
going.
We wanted to be first and we wanted to be last.
And so time sitting there and small talking or whatever, the customer, they'd prefer this to feel like "Oh, they got me the loan really fast, and it was
Immediately.
super."
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. And the easier we are to do business with a loan officer, the more likely a loan officer is to choose us.
I see. So the loan officer is trying to make the customer happy, you're trying to make the loan officer happy.
Yep. Absolutely.
Okay, so keep going.
To extension, we want to make the customer happy as well, the end customer. So
Sure.
we were looking at the opportunity to modify this workflow and shorten it. And I came upon a little bit of a problem, which was once the loan was approved, we have to put it into our accounting system and be able to collect payments against that loan. And there was
After it's approved.
after it's approved.
So hold on a second. The customer isn't sitting there with a loan officer anymore.
No, not at this point. Typically, they have been approved. They've provided their necessary documentation that was requested in order to prove their identity and whatnot. And they're probably out the door. They're probably riding their bike, their banana car to their house, when they think everything's happy and go lucky. And they're just waiting. They're probably not waiting, but they would expect a bill in the mail asking for payment on their loan.
Okay.
But we ran into a little bit of problem with the original solution that we came up with, and I found out that it wasn't going to work. That we're going to have to make modifications to the solution. And that kicked off a lot of discussion, a lot of internal consternation because it was already a big project. There was already a large amount of money funded for the effort.
Again, I'm gonna pause here. There was already a project underway at Banana Cars Finance to improve the process of getting the completed loan into your system to start generating all of the equipment that would manage the payments. So there was some boss somewhere had already funded, "We've got to improve this process of getting loans into our financing system."
Yeah.
Okay,
It was to improve the origination portion of the process, but I found a problem with the servicing portion of the process as a
the
result
servicing.
as a result of our proposed solution. So, in other words, it worked locally, it didn't work globally.
Say more about that.
In finance and manufacturing, often you can optimize changes at one station or one portion of the process. But if you don't pay attention to its impact downstream, you may actually cause more problems than you solved.
Are you talking about, so for example, if you tweak something and suddenly something gets a little bit easier in inputting let's say this into the financial software that handles payments,
Mhm.
you could screw something up later for the buyback process or something. Or what I'm making this
Or
up because I don't know about cars, but
or collectors.
oh, collectors,
Yes.
debt collectors.
Yes. Um,
Oh, I talk about end-to-end thinking. Okay, go ahead.
yeah, it's a reality of loans, right? Not
Right.
everybody pays back their loan. So one of the aspects of loan servicing is to make sure that you can contact that customer when they
Right.
don't make a payment. And that was the crux of the problem that we ran into, which was if I didn't make this change, it was going to cause a problem with loan collections.
If you didn't make
If I didn't make the change, it was
a
going to,
change that you wanted to make. So you
yeah.
found a problem with there was project A, it was spun up. And
Mhm.
Jeff came in and said, hold the phone, project A, all funded and everything. We've got a problem.
Houston,
And
we've got a problem.
Houston, we've got a problem because later on, when things go to collections, if we don't fix this now, we're going to have a massive issue with collections. So you were coming in and saying, I object at the wedding ceremony.
I am Jeff. I'm Jeff.
I object. So how did you object? How did you discover this problem and object?
I treated it more like an engineer.
What
We
does that
had a
mean?
requirement that we did not meet. And
So it
I
was in the requirements document. It's just
no,
somehow
it needed to be added to the requirements document as a change. As
okay.
a
But how did you
change.
know? How did you figure out that was
Due
an
diligence in my business analysis work to understand the systems integrations.
okay, so
Because
you yeah, go ahead.
a good business systems analyst won't just look at their own system. They'll look at the feeding systems that this system feeds and make sure that you don't create problems for downstream or upstream systems as a result of what you're doing.
This is highly related to we call it service design. In my head, business systems analyst was like the early way of saying it's actually the problem side, like what you're figuring out, and the solution is service design
Mhm.
in a
Yeah.
way. Okay,
Um,
so you were an early service designer.
so I brought it back to the team and I said, hey, look, what if we just make this small change to our solution and we can move forward? And the comment came back, well, but it would change the definition of our project.
What do you mean?
Because it was data collection oriented, they had defined it based on a presumed solution of how we were going to collect data.
Okay, wait,
Not
we can
not
pause there.
based on the problem, but based on the solution.
All right, that's a gem. They had defined the product based on what they assumed the solution would be.
Yep.
And the solution they assumed was what? Data collection?
It's part of the credit application process. So you have to collect data about the consumer asking for credit.
Okay, and because that was so say more about that. So they assumed the solution was something about collecting and you were saying it's
It's
not
not
just
enough data. It's not
oh,
enough
it's not
data.
enough data.
It's not enough. We had to collect more data in order to satisfy collections needs should the loan go bad.
I see. And so how was that not part of their thinking before? How would that have changed the definition of the product?
Ironically, it was a matter of just 2 or 3 additional fields. It wasn't a significant ask.
Yeah, because it doesn't sound like it would be. It sounds like you're asking for additional contact information.
Pretty much.
But their answer
And in
was
the and
go
in the
ahead.
business, they call it skip tracing. So you skip a payment, we're gonna trace back where you're at. So
Okay.
that so we can call you and or send notices in the mail asking for payment. And eventually, especially in the automotive business, they can repossess. They can
Right.
send out people to actually take possession of the vehicle because the vehicle typically will secure the loan. And therefore, the bank has a lien on that vehicle. In mortgages, you get foreclosed upon and you get thrown out of your house. But with vehicles, there's actually a repossessor that can go and pick up the vehicle. So,
Okay. So this just I'm going to pause here because it's something like, why is this even a story? You're a product person, a business systems analyst. You're working on a loan application where they already know nobody's taking my banana car away, where they already know they're collecting data. You raise your hand and say, yo, we need 3 more fields, like birthday and shoe size, whatever. It's just 3
right.
more fields and it's going to solve a lot. And they say, no, that's going to completely change the definition of this project.
Yeah. It was a big pushback. They did not
Why?
want to add additional fields. And the thought process that I was going through was the same, which is, why is this such a big deal? But what I wasn't factoring, and I think this is important to understand about corporate environments oftentimes, when you get budgeted for a certain amount of money and you're expected to deliver within a certain amount of time, somebody's being measured against the success of being on time and on budget. And this was a problem that we tackled a lot with agile concepts. But from a budgeting and finance perspective, there's still this tendency to want to stay the course. Don't make changes. Changes cost money. Changes cause variance. Finance does not like variance.
Okay, so this is another point I think that is a really big part of becoming more senior in organizations. I think when we're younger
Mhm.
and newer, we whine about this and talk about how stupid it is to be driven by short-sighted financial decisions.
Right,
And it's fine to whine about that, but that's like whining about your parents when you're a teenager. You're
right.
not seeing the bigger picture. The bigger picture of a company is that they have to budget, they have to schedule, and that if you follow the money for your boss's boss, their puzzle looks different.
Yes.
And if one puzzle piece shifts a tiny bit and you're like, oh, we just need an extra $10,000 in 2 weeks, the larger the organization, the more impossible that request becomes
Because they've already allocated the resources to something else.
to something else.
So you
Oh,
are robbing Peter to pay Paul when you're making a change request in that context.
this is like a snowball that rolls uphill. It gets to be a bigger problem as it rolls. So you were there saying, yo, you idiots, we just need 3 more fields and this is going to help a lot later on when we try to repossess these cars. And they're like, no, it vast. And so tell us more. Tell us what happened.
I talked to my manager. We'll call him George. We'll protect the innocent here. And I asked George, I said, look, George, we can't book a loan without these 3 pieces of information. And I think this current solution is just going to wreck us from a timing, from a project perspective. It's going to overcomplicate the solution if we have to ask to go back and grab more pieces of information after the approval, because typically the customer's out the door, they're gone. They're not there physically anymore. So that means the loan officer was going to have to call back the customer and say, hey, can I have 3 more pieces of information because you've been approved?
The loan officer is then not going to want to come back to banana car financing, even if it was easy the first time, because now they're pestering their customer.
No. So we came up with a solution, and I worked with our outside development team to come up with a solution. And the solution was really simple. Let's just consolidate all of these data entry screens into a single screen, number one. But let's use progressive disclosure on that screen to indicate when you need additional information. And for those that are not familiar with progressive disclosure, it's just the idea that I only expose it when I need to expose the information to you based on rules. And these are pretty clear and cut rules. And he said, okay, that's great and all, but what's my business incentive for doing this? And George really pressed me on this, and he pushed me on it. And I do thank him as an early mentor in my life. So I went back to the credit decisioning team and I said, hey, curious. Part of this idea was that we wanted to get to 80% auto approval rate because automated in this business was just golden. We didn't want manual.
So this was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? Back in the heyday of banana cars
Yeah.
and muscle banana cars. I'm
Over
really
10 years ago. And automation was really important because the faster you could get it, the more automated you could do it, the faster you could decision to less time that the loan.
okay, but so I would think that the ones that were easy to auto decide are the ones that were less likely to end up in collections anyway.
True.
Right.
So he went about it from, don't look at it from the negative and risk, look at it from the revenue and positive possibilities. And so I went to the credit decision team. I said, hey, could you rerun your model and see what our decision rate would be if we added these 3 additional pieces of information? And lo and behold, it wasn't just collections that would benefit. It was the decision engine that would benefit as well, because we went from like 79% to 87%.
Okay, again, to slow down for a second. So this is really interesting. George, your boss, said, find the positive financial impact of doing this versus the negative one.
Right.
So that's pretty savvy. We have some good bosses in our lives, hopefully over the years. So you went back and were able to say, if we do, not if we don't do this, we'll lose money, but if we do this, we'll end up with a
Gaining money.
better,
Yeah.
we're making money. Okay, great. Seems like this is going smoothly.
So, final hurdle, we do have a loan officer relationship management team. And they said, can we at least run this past a couple of loan officers, make sure that they'll like these new designs?
Which had 3 additional fields if the person was high risk.
Yeah. And there's a couple options here. One is we don't reduce it down to anything. We just simplify the interface. 2
What do you
was
mean?
because the interface was using 9 screens prior to this solution proposal.
It was using, say that again, what screens?
9 screens.
Oh, 9 screen. Oh, 9 screen. Okay, go ahead.
So a fair amount of time spent was simply waiting for the new screen to load.
Oh, 10 years ago. Yep.
There
And
was
they
no
had,
latency
and
there.
again, they had associated this with time, as if somehow like this magic thing of under 5 minutes was going to suddenly.
Again, it was ease of doing business. So if you had to go through 9 screens worth in order to complete the data entry, that's kind of friction. That's pain
Okay, keep going.
from pure user experience perspective. So we came up with some designs, and we convinced them, the program team, to allow us to go ahead and schedule a call with a couple of loan officers to do a user feedback session. First time I ever did a user feedback session. Blind tapping my way, trying to figure it out because we didn't have UX researchers on staff. But I did know something from a little bit of research that it was very important to ask open-ended questions, not
Okay.
closed-ended questions. I did know that it was important to try to make sure that you didn't influence the decision of the user as to what their preference was. I took care during the call to present the 3 options. One option was 10 screens.
That's good to put that one in there. Like
Always put one that is easy to say no to.
27 screens. Go ahead, keep going.
The second one was just the 9 screens collapsed into a single screen, but you still had to fill out the same amount of information.
Right.
And the third was this idea that you were going to fill out just 9 pieces of information. And then if the decision came back, need more information, you'd fill out the rest of it. Because
Right.
the credit decision engine doesn't say yes, no. It said yes, no, and maybe. And the maybe was, I need more information in order to make a final decision.
Okay.
Now, we presented it, and I think we had 3, maybe 4. It wasn't statistically significant from a quantitative perspective. It was more qualitative.
So, yeah, and I want to throw in one of my little gems here. With user testing, and if organizations are new to it and they don't like the fact that it's not statistically significant, the little line I like to use is, this finds out if there's a wrinkle in the carpet.
Exactly.
And if there's a wrinkle in the carpet and one person trips over it, then other people are going to trip over it. It has nothing to do with the statistical significance of the percentage of the carpet that's wrinkled, or whether or not the N equals something appropriate of the users. If the carpet's wrinkled, people. So go ahead.
Right. And I like to think of it from a product perspective. I say, I'm just looking for directional.
That's great.
Am I
Okay, so
going
it-
down the wrong path completely? Am I on the right path, but I might need to change direction a little bit? Or did I nail it? Now, I never expect to nail it 100% as a product manager. What I expect to know is, am I completely off the path, or am I on the path with maybe some slight adjustments? And that's what I was looking for evidence of. We went through, and I think I got 3 out of 4 to say they liked the progressive disclosure option. I think one of them said they liked the single page full data option, and nobody voted for the 10 screens.
Shocking. Shocking.
And we were wrapping up, and in comes my program manager, Ivan.
Ivan. Dun, dun.
Not
Your
my
program
manager.
manager. So even, yeah, okay.
My
go on.
manager's on the call with me. And we're both listening at this point, and the program manager pipes up and says, would it impact your decision if this design wasn't going to work on mobile?
Okay, wait. Ivan comes in during a user feedback session.
During a user feedback session,
Your
he's
boss is
listening.
on the call, and all the loan officers are on the call,
Mhm.
and says, "What about mobile?"
What about mobile? Now, Tamara, in this environment, we were solving for somebody sitting at a desk talking to somebody across from them.
Right. 10 years ago.
We acknowledged that mobile was emerging, obviously. Obviously, I think by then it was already, this is about 12 years ago. I think we're on iPhone 6 by then. So it was emerging, but there wasn't a pressing need for some loan officer to walk out around with his mobile handset and take applications while people were out on the floor.
No, there's a reason why the loan officers have their own office. There's data to the way like car dealerships are set up. There's a reason why there's the manager to go ask about the discount. There's a reason why you go into the loan officer's office upstairs.
No.
It's because it works, right?
If we're going,
Oh my God.
we're going
Okay.
directly to the consumer, I could understand his comment. But the original project was to improve the loan officer's experience. It wasn't necessarily to improve the consumer experience because direct consumer applications weren't a significant percentage of our business at that point in time.
And if it was, can you imagine sitting there at a loan officer's desk? One, you're in their office, and instead of going to their computer, they pull out their fucking iPhone and they start asking, and then, or you're out on the show floor, let's say, and some bozo loan officer comes up and in front of all the other people within earshot starts asking you about your yearly income.
And so I think part of it could have been there was some validity to his concern
Okay,
from 3 to 5 years from now
sure.
at that point in time. But it wasn't an immediate need. And this is where I always think back to it from perspective of what was really going on. I think what was really going on was more to do with the finances and the program delivery timeframe.
Okay, wait. First of all, 1 second. What about mobile, by the way, is a classic example of a tornado ripping through a project. It comes from out of nowhere and it destroys everything in its path. It has nothing to do with the quality of your work beforehand. It has nothing to do with the project plans. But once it whips through, it's whipped
Mhm.
through. Classic tornado. Okay. And you just said a whole bunch of nouns in a row. You said it has more to do with what? Like the financial.
I was trying to understand his motivation for interjecting with that comment.
Yeah.
To see if there was some validity. I had talked to the engineering team and I had said specifically to them, we're not designing for mobile right now. We can make sure from a breakpoint perspective in New York design that we allow for tablets and desktops. But we explicitly excluded mobile from the requirements up front, even before I found the problem with the solution with collections.
Okay, but you did that with the engineering team.
The engineering.
George was not part of that discussion, right?
Ivan,
No, George, your boss.
he was aware of it. We talked about it a little bit.
Okay. All right, fair.
We had. What was curious to me was where Ivan was getting his information that it was going to be a problem with mobile.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't had any discussions with the engineering team about the feasibility of mobile to begin with. So either he had back-channeled my engineering team and had discussions with them that I wasn't aware of, or he was making a statement not based in actual technical reality at the time that had been confirmed by our engineering team.
If he was making a statement not based in technical reality, the question becomes, what was he making a statement based in? She says, setting it up for you.
I think he was concerned about delivery timeframes and whether or not he was going to look bad or good based on the success of this project in terms of on time and on budget.
And future work. So he was a
And-
contractor.
The other factor is he was technically a consultant and not a full-time employee. He was on a contract with the organization, and I think he was trying to set himself to look good for either extending his contract and or coming in permanent.
Extending his contract or coming in permanent. There's a really, first of all, it's so annoying because it's so true. And there's probably people who are nodding their heads out there like it's just so obvious. Also, it just points, there's something that happens over and over again. Pattern matching is part of becoming more senior too. It's really easy to come in and be the devil's advocate and look smart.
Right.
There's always a what about mobile, right? And it's a cheap tactic to throw a wrench into the work other people are doing.
Not only that, Tamara, he never mentioned it directly to me or George, my boss, which told me that he had a different goal. I won't call it a full agenda. I'll call it a goal. And that goal was not in direct violation or direct competition with our goal, but there was some friction between his goals and our goals.
Yeah, because just like we just said before, I'm just taking notes we said before that as you go higher and higher in an organization, the financial puzzle makes things stickier. But also, if there's a financial motivation, like for a consultants, I'm a consultant. You're always conscious of how you're coming off. And it's especially tricky in the world of product or project or program, because part of your job is to stop things when they're going sideways or to be the smart person in noticing that there is a hurdle coming up. There is a way to use that for evil. An old friend of mine, Chris Noddler, wrote a book on usability for evil. I forget the actual anyway, but there's a way to use it for evil. And that's let me make myself look indispensable in the moment by presenting an unsolvable problem that nobody's thought of.
Right. And to be fair, if we had the conversation ahead of time and he said, Jeff, I have these concerns about the feasibility of mobile, then I would have reminded him that we agreed that we weren't going to solve for mobile as part of any solution regardless. Then there wouldn't have been any reason for him to make that comment to begin with, because we had made a business decision as an organization that we were not going to solve for mobile at this point in time. And whether or not that made it more difficult later, there's always the argument about technical debt when you ignore some aspect of the solution. But at the end of the day, and I hate that phrase sometimes, you as a product have to make trade-off decisions. And sometimes, yes, you are kicking the can down the road. And you recognize that this may cost the organization more money down the road later than it would today.
Why? George was on the call, your boss. Ivan was on the call. A bunch of loan officers were on call. You said that George was aware, at least parenthetically aware, that mobile wasn't a priority. Why didn't George just say, Ivan, shut it?
Because you're in front of customers. Remember, this is a user feedback session with loan officers, and technically they are our customer. So it's a customer feedback session.
Oh my God. And Ivan pulled it out during a customer feedback session.
Yes, customer user feedback session.
Okay, keep going.
Remember, loan officers we don't employ loan officers. They are third parties. They are independent of us. And that's why it was extremely uncomfortable for me, because I knew the minute that he made the statement that he was manipulating the perceptions of the people's choices.
The perception of the people's choices?
Yes,
because say more.
They had made their choice earlier. We'd done a round of voting on which ones they liked. Maybe that wasn't even appropriate, because typically you'd want to do it blind voting, right? But ultimately, it was pretty clear that the solution that I favored won 3 out of the 4 selections.
But he put a shadow on all that. He said,
right. And so if it's going to affect mobile, we wouldn't choose that option, because they knew the future was mobile for consumer applications. They knew that they wanted that to be enabled sooner rather than later.
Yeah, but anybody in product knew 10 years ago that there would be 17 iterations of the pages anyway before mobile. It's not like it's not like you were designing the system to last for the next 5 years.
And even at that time, 10 or 12 years ago, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that iOS and Android were going to be
The standards.
the standards. They were still emerging. There was still some risk. And financial institutions, by and large, are low risk averse organizations to begin with.
Okay,
Yeah,
so and Jillian, hi Jillian, I'm so glad you're here. Not a tornado, a nuclear. One fucking sentence, right? So what happened right after he said that?
we revoted, and not surprisingly, they did not vote for my solution.
You revoted?
And that's what got recorded as the results of the user feedback session.
Oh my God.
When I
gotta-
read the notes as the replay of I immediately blew my lid because I was like, that's not the results. That's not reflecting what actually happened during the user feedback session. And now you're selectively picking a portion of the user feedback session to now justify your positioning statement. And at the time, I wasn't thinking in terms of politics. I was still an engineer-minded person, and
Yep.
it just drove me nuts because it didn't make any sense.
See, that's the thing. I think that we, as we're in the middle of our careers, think that data is going to solve these arguments, right? And that people listen to it. We think that logic is going to prevail. We just think that there's no way something this dumb could make it through, and we don't respond in a political way
Right.
at the moment that we need to respond. So, okay, so I want to go with the rest of the story, but I want to pause here. The Jeff that's sitting in front of me today with 10 years more gray hairs, the director of product camp in Dallas, like somebody who really knows product. What, if that happened to you in a meeting today, what would you have done?
First of all, I would have had a conversation with Ivan, a deep conversation with Ivan about what his concerns are. It wouldn't have been stating what the solution needed to be. It wouldn't have been stating my position. It would have been understanding what his position is.
During the call?
No, ahead of the call.
Before
The
Early.
call. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, say.
Making sure
you didn't know he was going to say that, though.
I think what I should have done is, rather than trying to push my agenda off the solution, find out what other people's concerns really were. Get to the root of what I suspect was the situation. He's concerned about being on time and on budget, and this could blow his budget. As a product manager now, it's my responsibility to dig in and get that understanding of what their concern is in a leadership position over me.
Okay,
So
so
that-
I think that's the bigger solution. Of course, the one I push for all the time and I'm writing about, which is the shorthand is executive alignment. It's not just executives, it's Ivan alignment too. Because if these issues exist, the way to keep them from turning into tornadoes is to identify them a lot earlier in the process and not in front of fucking loan officers. And if I had a conversation with you separately a month before and said, dude, I need this contract to extend because I'm sending my llama to private school, it would have been like, okay, fine. Then let's make you look good. Whatever it is, it wouldn't have come up.
But I also learned something later in my career from an actual UX researcher. And one of the things that they did ahead of every user feedback session was, here's what we're going to talk about. Here's what we're not going to talk about.
Right.
Here's what we're trying to learn. Here's what we're not trying to learn. And lay out an actual strategy or tactics for the session itself. And lay ground rules for the session.
Ground rules. And I think we all talk about how like more and more people should get some fluency in getting user feedback. The problem is that they don't know what not to do. But if you were, Jeff, if we were on this, if this meeting happened this afternoon and you had, and Ivan did exactly the same scenario, and you had not talked to Ivan in advance, because some of the people listening today are going to have that meeting happen tomorrow.
Mhm.
And is there anything you think you could do at that moment that would be helpful?
I think what I could have done and maybe should have done is simply interjected to say, Ivan, I think we should talk about mobile as a separate discussion with a separate user feedback session. Today, I just wanted to understand perspectives on desktop and cut it off at that point,
Yep.
allowing for a future discussion
Yep.
without directly verbatim berating him or chastising him in any negative way
And
in
in
front of
fact,
the customers.
you could push it even farther. So I do a lot of complimenting to get my own way.
Mhm.
And the way I would take that one step farther is say, Ivan, that is such an awesome point, and it's such a big point and such a important point that I'd really like to take that offline and have a whole separate feedback. It's like kill them with kindness.
Right, right. And obviously I can look at this with 2020 hindsight, right? Because I can see it
Yeah.
from future experiences that hadn't happened yet. But at the end of the day, I look at it and I say there's things that I did learn from the experience that were positive. One is how to conduct a user feedback session, how not to. Two, to always remember that even though you logically see the solution as the best solution, you still have to influence the belief that it is the best solution.
Okay, wait. Okay, say that again. Even though you see it as logically the right solution, you have to influence the belief.
That it is
Say
the
more
right.
about that.
The fact is that reality is what we believe is true, not what is true.
Okay, say more.
Our perception of what is the truth is rooted in our belief that it is true to begin with.
Okay, so how would you apply that to this situation?
I think I would have gone back at it from a perspective of what are the concerns that need to be addressed with the solution, not just from a loan officer perspective, but internally. And not just from our um, credit operations team or a loan officer relationship team, but from our IT team, into the information technology team. There's multiple stakeholders. Each one has concerns from their frame of reference. And what I would do today that I didn't do then is I would try to understand the concerns from their frame of reference specifically. And
It's not logic, it's not data, it's what are their concerns, including Ivan needs money for Llama private school. Whatever they are, knowing them in advance. What ended up let me ask you now, what ended up happening? Because I wanna what ended up happening?
we really modified the workflow to allow for them to re-enter data after that screen. And when I called back about a year later, I was
Wait a second, wait, that's not enough, wait. Okay, we went from a system you were trying to fix a system.
essentially
Wait.
created 2 screens instead of 1.
Oh, 2 screens instead of 1, but it was still during the initial conversation.
They were separated in time from
Okay,
a
so it wasn't
workflow
2 screens, it
perspective.
was 2 separate interactions,
It ended up being 2 separate
which
interactions
it was
from the loan officer's perspective, which they did not like to begin with. And later, after I left the organization, I called back a friend and I asked him, how is the new solution working? And they said, one saving grace, we had to allow for a single screen full entry of all data,
Yeah.
regardless. And we gave them the choice of doing the shortened form to do the rapid decisioning or do the long form with a more extended decisioning. Almost all of the dealerships were just using the long form, but it was still a win for them because they didn't have to click through 9 screens anymore. They could just go through a single screen. But we did get a partial win out of this process, which was we gave them the option to go expedited or standard decisioning. And standard decisioning, they could use a single screen. Expedited, they risked having to fill out 2 screens separated in time.
right, if the person, like, failed the initial
If they failed the initial credit, just
what should have been launched if Ivan hadn't done that?
honestly, I was looking at, and I learned more later about what capabilities that we could have leveraged. Would have been a single screen just with highlighted fields of the bare minimum to get any kind of decision. And then the
Okay.
rest of the fields would be optional if you wanted an extended decision.
Because probably also loan officers filling out those 5 critical answers probably would know in their heads because of their experience, I need to get that additional information now because this person makes $17 a year and it's going to kick back.
Yeah, these guys figure it out. We do have secrecy in our credit decisioning engines, but over time you figure it out. Just like SEO and Google
Okay.
search. You're going to eventually figure out the rules just through trial and error. And not surprisingly, though, the problem still is they didn't like having to go to a second screen after the fact. After the initial decision came back, maybe. They just wanted to know yes or no. They never wanted a maybe. They never wanted a maybe.
They never wanted a maybe. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And I think that was also part of the learning, because ultimately we set out to reduce the amount of time for them to fill out an application, but that wasn't the primary concern that they had. It was more about, I just need to know yes or no based on the information that you need in order to get to a full yes or no.
Right.
They didn't care how much information it was. It was a matter of seconds for them.
Okay. So
Literally
we've got
a matter
about
of 30 to 60 seconds difference for them.
We've got about 5 minutes left. And here's what I want to do. First of all, we got comments like, for example, so wonderful to hear someone share these horror stories and helping people embrace the realities. So that's exactly what this is. So I'm glad you're liking it. If you do like this, let one other person know or leave a comment on the podcast or sign up to get notified at corporateunderpants.com. But in the last 5 minutes, I want to talk about lessons that anybody can take away from this conversation with Jeff. So one of the ones we talked about was, let's call it puzzle perspective, right? As you get higher up in an organization, the puzzles are different than our puzzles. So applying our own logic and our assumption that sanity will prevail or that data will change people's minds isn't useful to us anymore. And then bitching about that isn't useful to us anymore. It's people problems, which luckily we're good at. Another thing you said, George, your boss said, look for the positive money, not the negative money, to start building those arguments.
Revenue influences better than cost savings.
Revenue influences better than cost. Okay, great. And then we also, a big theme of Align Before Design and the work that I do in solving this is that the earlier you have these conversations and you force these conversations and you force people's assumptions out into the light, the better off you'll be. The assumptions are there. The pressures are there. The desire to extend the contract is there. Good, bad, or indifferent, it is there.
Mhm.
So the best way to fight it is to drag it out into the light way earlier so that this can't happen. And that's what I'm all about. And this alignment persona process that I'm trying to get out there is all about too.
Here on Corporate Underpants.
And there's one other thing that I want to say that I've been modeling annoyingly this, but if you're a newer practitioner, in the beginning of this, I stopped every 2 seconds to clarify and articulate exactly what Jeff was talking about, and even found a place where I didn't understand, where I thought it was direct to consumer software, but it was to the loan officer and it was a separate, and they were choosing. Be annoying and slow down the conversations with stakeholders, because you never know where language is going to trip you up and where the obvious isn't obvious at all. So that's my message. Jeff, what do you want to tell people?
That the conversation in your head and the conversation in their head and the real conversation are 3 different conversations.
Say that again.
The conversation that you thought you had in your head versus the conversation I thought I had in my head versus the conversation that actually occurred can be 3 different conversations.
Totally. One of the best things you can do as you're starting out in your career in the middle, if you're confused, first of all, trust it. Second of all, create a glossary, which is going to feel like the dumbest thing in the world. But you would be shocked how many product problems come back to people defining the same word in 2 different ways. Astounding. Okay, so I just want to note that there, as my dear friend Dune said, there's always money in the banana car, which is a good reminder for all of us. In a reference to, oh shit, Now I can't even remember the name of the show. Arrested Development.
Oh,
There it
yep.
is. Jeff, thank you so much for being willing to share this story. It's a vulnerable thing to do. I think the more that we share these stories, the more we can get experience by osmosis and try to stop corporate underpants before it starts. So thank you so much, and thank everyone who joined us today. And follow Jeff if you know of any roles that are fit in his candidate market fit statement. Let him know. And thank you, and I'll see you next time on Corporate Underpants. Go to corporateunderpants.com to sign up for notifications and tell me your story, and maybe you can be a guest and show your underpants on LinkedIn. Bye, everybody.
No let rampant politics and clusterfuckery ruin all your projects and your sanity. Smooth ugly penny lines and make it all make sense. Get experience by osmosis here on Corporate Underpants.